devastating hurricanes, unprecedented heat waves, catastrophic flooding. An upward trend of extreme weather and climate events is leading to significant losses across the globe. In the fight against climate change, no one is a bystander. China has pledged to peak the nation's CO2 emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. To shed light on the country's journey towards sustainable development, our reporters traveled across China to capture the stories of individuals, enterprises and public institutions who are striving to make a difference. As COP29, the UN Climate Change Conference, convenes from November the 11th to the 22nd in Azerbaijan, CGTN Radio brings you a special series, Greener China, A Journey to 2060. Join us on your favorite podcast platforms to witness Chinese people's awareness, actions and the challenges we face as the country journeys into a greener future.
There's been a rapid rise in the number of wildlife here. Some of the animals that we rarely saw are a common sight now.
We used to see only dozens of varieties of birds, but now there are 500 to 600.
The past decade has been a success for rare plant species. Not a single one under protection has gone extinct.
Hi, welcome to our special program, Greener China, A Journey to 2060. I'm Zihang. In the last episode of our series, we surveyed how people in China had reshaped their thinking about some pressing environmental issues, with a special focus on Gaoligong Mountain in the southwest. In this episode, we will talk about what exactly has made this transition a reality. China is one of the first countries in the world to have introduced an eco-red line system. Beijing has bought around 30% of the nation's land and sea areas under this scheme for biodiversity conservation. The country has also created more than 11,000 natural protected zones, covering 18% of the total landmass, and is striving to establish the world's largest national park system by 2035. Since 1995, China has implemented fishing bans on many rivers, lakes and seas to protect vulnerable aquatic resources. There's also a complete prohibition against commercial logging in all natural forests across the nation. To find out how these measures have made a difference, I returned to Gaoligong Mountain. Teeming with precious flora and fauna, this area on the China-Myanmar border wasn't what it's like back in the 1980s. Hunter-turned-ranger Mao Qinsheng told me that poaching and logging were rampant prior to the establishment of the nature reserve. To safeguard this prime piece of real estate, Mao and his colleagues have walked the length and breadth of the mountain for decades.
We keep an eye out for snap traps and other hunting tools. We also make sure no one comes to pick the wild herbs and plants growing in abundance. Not even a blade of grass can be taken out of here.
I followed Mao on one of his daily inspections. It's a strenuous 6-hour trek through rough terrain, overgrown with rich, pristine vegetation. We didn't see any irregularities during the hike, but the 52-year-old warned that if he spotted any illegal behavior, it would be his job to escort the culprit down the mountain and hand them over to law enforcers, who'd then press charges according to law. It's thanks to hundreds of forest rangers like Mao Qinsheng that this arc of wildlife has regained vitality. Not only is Gaoligong Mountain one of the most biodiverse hotspots in the entire country, it is also acknowledged as the global gene pool of species.
There's been a rapid rise in the number of wildlife here. Some of the animals that we rarely saw are a common sight now, like the wild boar, the bear, and the takin. And also, as the herbal medicine market is strictly regulated, the wild plants that used to be most sought after are now growing in abundance.
The mountain is also a renowned haven for avian species. As mentioned in the last episode of this program, ever since the brief encounter with a group of birdwatchers in the 80s, Ho Ti Guo, the villager I met at Baihualing Ridge, had learned to see the potential aesthetic and economic value in the birds that he used to shoot for food and fun. In 1995, Ho's family, together with a bunch of like-minded neighbors, set up the Gaoligong Mountain Farmers Association for Biodiversity Conservation, the first of its kind in the country. One of the key roles of this association is to provide bird protection tips and guidance on replacing unprofitable stable crops with high-yield cash crops.
We started growing coffee beans, chestnuts, persimmons, and walnuts. These crops have really boosted our incomes.
The 55-year-old and his fellow villagers didn't stop just there. They also started planting trees to attract birds and prevent soil erosion, and invited experts and professionals to their village to impart the latest farming and rearing techniques. Blessed with increased household budgets, the locals no longer saw the mountain as merely a source of sustenance and raw materials. Ho Tigor told me that less human disturbance has opened up more living space for wild birds. Before the advent of CCTV cameras, he and his friends would have to take turns keeping vigil at night up in the mountain to protect wildlife from unwanted visitors. During the cold months, it's also their responsibility to ensure that the birds are well fed and healthy.
Heavy snow pushes the birds to look for food on farmland. But of course, there are pesticides on our fields. To make the birds safe, we usually scatter grain worms in our neighborhood, so that they won't have to go for the crops and get poisoned.
The hard work has paid off. With visitors flocking in, Ho's homestay and birdwatching business is booming. Each year, his village makes around 10 million yuan, roughly $1.4 million from tourism alone.
There used to be only a few dozen varieties of birds in this area. Now, there are easily 500 or 600 types. There are about 20 B&Bs in our village, plus 100 or so bird guides. The growing number of birds is also attracting more visitors.
After speaking with Mao Qinsheng and Ho Tigor, I went to meet up with the chief of the local Nature Reserve Management Bureau in the hope of learning more about their conservation efforts. Yin Shijian highlighted a raft of measures implemented since the 1980s, including biological corridors to join up previously broken pieces of wildlife habitat, regular seminars and photo exhibitions, and more to raise public awareness. Their partnership with the Chinese Academy of Sciences has been especially effective.
We collect the seeds of endangered plant species in the wild and bring them to our lab until they germinate. Then we transplant them back in the reserve. The results are promising. Just to give you an example, there used to be only 200 big tree rhododendrons left in the wild. But after we adopted this approach, we've grown over 30,000 of these iconic species.
Thanks to over 40 years of conservation, the mountain is now home to 5,000 kinds of higher plants and more than 2,700 animal species, including nearly 800 categories of birds. Meanwhile, its forest coverage has shot up from 82% to 94% in a few decades. All this has happened essentially in lockstep with the rest part of Yunnan, which is the first Chinese province to enact local laws on biodiversity protection. Since 1958, the southwestern region has established 362 nature reserves, accounting for about 14% of Yunnan's land area. Together, these biodiversity hotspots have effectively conserved 90% of the province's typical ecosystems and 80% of its key wildlife. Professor Geng Yupeng at Yunnan University acknowledges the progress, but he's more inclined to see his home province as a small piece of the larger jigsaw.
China has put ecological protection at the forefront of its national development strategy. It's also investing huge amounts of money in this field. All these efforts are unprecedented in scale and intensity, and the results are indeed remarkable, especially in forest protection, biodiversity conservancy, and ecological restoration.
Over the years, Beijing's relentless efforts have put over 300 endangered species on the path to recovery. Notably, the population of giant pandas in the wild in China has risen from about 1,100 in the 1980s to around 1,900. The crested ibis, another Chinese icon which was once thought to be extinct, has seen its population soar from only 7 in the 1980s to more than 7,000. The country also boasts the world's fastest expanding forest area. Since the year 2000, it has contributed to around a quarter of the world's newly added green areas. In 2023 alone, it planted nearly 4 million hectares of forest. To put the number in perspective, it almost equals the size of Switzerland. Of course, there remain a myriad of hurdles and stumbling blocks on the way to biodiversity protection and the green transition. And we will address that in the next episode of our special series, Greener China, A Journey to 2060.
A forest ranger takes care of several hundred hectares of land in the nature reserve. It's a tough job.
There's a shortage of forest rangers. It takes a lot of time and effort to train one. Young people are generally reluctant to join the force.
To find the balance between conservation and development is the million-dollar question.
Stay tuned. Until next time, I'm Zihang. Bye for now.